Beacon Press Audio presents Humanizing Immigration, How to Transform Our Racist and Unjust System by Bill Ong Hing. This audiobook is narrated by Rob Brinkmann, published by Beacon Press Audio, 2023. For the children I met at the Border Patrol detention facility in Clint, Texas, in June 2019. Shame on our country for your confinement under unconscionable conditions. I pray every day that you have recovered and that you are enjoying the loving, safe life that you deserve. Preface. My first encounter with a federal immigration agent occurred when I was a law student in 1973. I was working on landlord-tenant cases at the Chinatown North Beach office of the San Francisco Neighborhood Legal Assistance Foundation, SFNLAF, and wrapping up a successful rent reduction case on behalf of a Spanish-speaking client, Jorge Guzman. Because the attorney working on the case couldn't speak Spanish, and I have some fluency, I worked on the case as a law clerk and as an interpreter. The housing attorney asked me to hand a check over to Jorge at the final meeting and explain the terms of the settlement. Jorge was ecstatic at our success in the battle with his landlord, but he told me that he was troubled by something that happened at what was known at the time as the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, the day before. It seemed that Jorge had gone to the INS building to ask how to file an immigration petition for his wife, who was in Mexico. Jorge was a lawful permanent resident of the United States. He happened to run into an immigration agent in the hallway, who asked to look at Jorge's green card. Jorge obliged, and the agent asked Jorge to accompany him to his office. Jorge took a seat opposite the officer, who shocked Jorge by shouting, "This card looks fake!" Jorge assured the agent that the card was real. In front of Jorge, the agent took a pair of scissors and cut the card in half to inspect it. The agent then said, "Actually, you're right. It is real," and handed the pieces back to Jorge and told him to leave. As Jorge showed me the pieces of the card, I sat in disbelief and outrage. I asked Jorge if he remembered where the agent's office was, and he told me he did. We walked the several blocks from the SFNLAF office at 250 Columbus Avenue to the appraiser's building at 630 Sansom Street, where the INS was located. Jorge told me that the agent's office was on the 7th floor, so we took the elevator up. Jorge recalled the exact door he had been led to the day before, and I knocked loudly. The door opened to a room with about 8 desks, and an agent asked what we wanted. I asked Jorge if he saw the agent from the day before, and Jorge pointed to an agent across the room. I said, "We'd like to speak with the agent over there." The agent across the room greeted us with a stern, "What do you want?" I said, "My client tells me that you took his green card yesterday and cut it in half with a pair of scissors, even though it's a real card. I really want you to do something about your mistake." The agent responded, "Yes, that happened. Don't worry about it. Just go down to room 100 and tell them that Agent Smith sent you. They'll take care of you." I thought to myself, wow, vindication for Jorge. As I explained to Jorge what happened, we happily rode the elevator back down to the first floor and looked for room 100. It wasn't hard to find. It was a public information room that had a long line of about 50 people waiting to ask questions or pick up immigration forms. I admitted to Jorge that it wasn't such a victory after all. By the time we got to the front of the line, an hour later, the person on the other side of the counter handed us a form for a replacement card and told us to send it in with the appropriate filing fee. It eventually took over 6 months for Jorge to get a new card. Agent Smith was the first, but certainly not the last, jerk working for the Immigration Service I would encounter over the course of my career. That first experience that Jorge opened my eyes to is emblematic of the institutionalized racism and othering in our immigration system that has led to the dehumanization of non-citizens that I have witnessed over the course of my career. The framework and policies that immigration officials work within seemingly gives them license to act cruelly, rudely, and even violently. Working in that particular legal aid office as a law student was a blessing. The location stood at the border of the Chinese and Italian immigrant communities, with fascinating cultures and great food spots. Most importantly, from the perspective of an aspiring lawyer, the wide-ranging issues that clients brought to the legal aid office provided a great learning environment. Looking back, I can hardly believe that in the summer after my first year of law school, Ed Steinman, a veteran of the office who was starting his career as a law professor, asked me to assist him in representing Kinney Lau, a 9-year-old student whose case was before the U.S. Supreme Court. Kinney could not understand English, but was placed in a classroom where everything was conducted in English. That sink-or-swim environment might work for some, but it wasn't working for Kinney. His case led to the landmark decision Lau v. Nichols, 1974. In which the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the San Francisco Unified School District violated a provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by not providing equal educational access to non-English-speaking students. Lau has become the basis for bilingual education and other innovative approaches that have been implemented across the country to allow immigrant children to participate in public education programs. After graduating from law school, I jumped at the chance to work at SFN LAF and accepted the job offer to take over the immigration caseload. I mostly took on family immigration petitions and deportation defense cases for clients of Chinese and Mexican descent. Among the people I represented in dozens of deportation cases was the Cabral family. They had moved to San Jose, California from Mexico in 1974, about the time I was graduating from law school. The father, Felipe, was a baker in a local panaderia, a Mexican pastry shop. Lucrecia, the mother, was a stay-at-home parent. The couple had 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. The family entered without inspection by paying a smuggler to help them cross the border to, in Felipe's words, seek a better life. But a couple years later, someone, a friend, or enemy, or neighbor, or co-worker, reported them to federal immigration agents, or La Migra, as they are called in the Mexican community. The arrests were violent. Agents came at 4 in the morning, surrounding the house and pounding on the front door. After several minutes, Sylvia, one of the daughters, answered the door and denied that anyone else was home. But the agents busted in and eventually found the rest of the family hiding under the house. Everyone was arrested and dragged into federal detention. The date was May 20th, 1976. Days later, I met the Cabral family when I was doing my rounds as a legal services attorney assigned to interview immigrants who had been taken into custody by La Migra. Many years later, another daughter, Maria Reina, who was 17 at the time of the raid, told me that the incident was the most terrifying and traumatic experience of her life. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot that I could assert on behalf of the Cabral family, given the lack of rights provided under federal law to non-citizens without proper documents. In those days, however, it was easy enough to convince an immigration judge to allow Lucrecia and the children out of custody, pending the deportation hearing. Felipe was also released after the family came up with $2,000 bail. So at least the family was out of custody as we prepared for the deportation hearing. I visited the family in San Jose on a Sunday afternoon to prepare for the hearing. They showed me around their house and pointed out the trap door that family members had used to hide under the house. They were upset about the way that the agents had pushed their way into the house at 4 a.m. Sylvia said the agents had even looked through the kitchen cabinets. The family wanted me to develop a strategy that would allow them to complain at the hearing about the intrusive behavior. We decided that they would refuse to admit deportability at their hearing, thereby setting up a procedure that would allow us to object to the introduction of incriminating statements made at the time of arrest, on the grounds that members of the family were questioned during an illegal search and seizure by the agents. We knew that that wouldn't get too far under prevailing law at the time, but at least the family would be able to testify and complain about the conditions of the arrests. That was important to them. The Cabral family took me in from the start.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?